I said, why did you forget to do something for Colin or for Charlotte? She goes, no. I mean, I'm going back to school to finish my teaching degree. And she did. I can't think of anything more important than us allowed to actually invest in our child's future. This is incredible. And by the way, this is not political. I don't know that these kids know what their parents, how they vote or how they think. I think they just think about going to school. What a horrible thing we did for 3 years is to isolate those people and take that out of their experience to work with other people. All of you are talking about the same thing. Why shouldn't people paying taxes have a choice in where those taxes go? And when it comes to education, my goodness, there's no other place in the world where everybody got a chance to get educated. And I wish that was still the case today. And Ms. Varma, I'll ask you, each of you, if you just could give your personal, and I know your testimonies were all great. I'm going to start with Ms. Sedler because she comes from Pittsburgh area, Brentwood, and go Steelers. If you could just share, because I think your story as a parent is where we need to go. And then Mr. Redmond, Mrs. Varma, and Mr. DeAngelis, Mr. Melkon, all of you. But if you would, Ms. Sedler, talk about whenever we had this exchange down here about why it's so important to you.
I gave life to my children. I made sacrifices for them. And I refuse to allow them to be sacrificed in a system that doesn't work for them. And so that's why I work hard every day to make sure other children don't have to sacrifice either. So any way we can lighten that load for our children and lighten that load for our families is critical, because you're right, they are 25% of the population, but 100% of our future. I don't see any better way to spend our time, our resources, and our focus than on that 100% of our future.
Yeah, quite a return on the investment. Mr. Redmond.
You know, I was thinking of a young gentleman who was about 18, 19 years old, who came to our school. Actually, his parents brought him to our school. And college wasn't for him, you know. And they just wanted to know if he was going to be okay driving the truck. And I assured him that he would be. And as many parents who come to my school, I wink at them and say, I'll take care of them personally, you know. And it makes me proud to say that these young folks who are maybe 18, 19 years old, who really don't know what to do with their lives, but for a small amount of money, they can get a CDL and go to work immediately and gain responsibility, because every parent wants their child to be responsible.
Let me ask you real quick. Please tell people what a CDL is.
Oh, I'm sorry. By the way, a CDL is a commercial driver's license. My apologies.
Thank you. Ms. Varma.
Thank you. Besides Denzel Washington, who's my favorite actor of all times, but Dr. Ben Carson comes after that, and that's
Amen.
because of his story. I wanted to become a neurosurgeon since 8 years old because I saw his story. My parents always showed us different, I used to hate it, but now I love that they did, but show us different biographies and documentaries. But watching his story was similar to mine because my mom made a lot of sacrifices. And because she knew he had a gifted mind and he struggled. And just like him, I didn't think I was smart. And my brother failed the second grade, and he's a chemical engineer. And I'm standing in front of you today telling that story. And so why I'm so passionate about this is because we have so many gifted minds, which is the title of his movie, if you have never watched it. Well, Gifted Hands, but I could say Gifted Minds. We have so many gifted minds that are just not being tapped into because we just send them off and we write them off. And we say, wait 20 years, wait 10 years, wait 5 years, wait 2 years. But we don't have that time. This is a really critical time in a child's life, in their academic life. And if you keep telling parents to wait, they don't want to wait anymore. We don't want to hear that. We want to be able to decide what school we go to. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pascarell, you're recognized for questions.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. I believe that this hearing today, with the distinguished witnesses that we've invited, and a committee which I think has the good intentions of Americans at heart. So we don't go into this with any malice. And we need to understand everyone's position. They're Americans. If you believe in choice, that's your opinion. And it should be respected. So, look, it's been 22 days. And you ousted the speaker for the crime of keeping the government open. So, I don't know if you're fit to walk the dog, let alone govern the Congress. In fact, the historic room in which we meet, which has suffered through so many failed speaker votes and unhinged conference meetings, has become the symbol for chaos. I hope the chairman will undertake a deep clean here when this is all over, whoever that may be. But let us set the record straight. And I will come back to our next meeting and agree that I was wrong on the facts that I'm going to present if you will have the time to go back over them. I have no charts, but I ask you to at least digest what I'm saying. When you look back at the record, really only one party fought to make education more affordable. That's the record. Put the legislation up on the board in your own mind. Only one party created millions of good jobs for skilled workers in a very short period of time. Our landmark American Rescue Plan invested $122 billion in education resources across our country, including over $341 million for schools in my district. And the Inflation Reduction Act was the single largest investment, talk about investments here today, ever in U.S. industry. We have an historic manufacturing boom thanks to the actions of one party. In 1 year, we unleashed $240 billion in private investment and created over 170,000 new jobs. The law is projected to create more than 1.5 million additional jobs. American factory building is now at nearly $200 billion a year. Just a side note, most of you voted no. Every job lost during the pandemic has been recovered, and the job growth is at a 40-year high. I'll stand corrected if you come in with something different. Unemployment is at a 54-year low. I'll stand corrected if you come in with other numbers and you can prove it. The economy is strong. As a former teacher in the public school, I know the education of our next generation is vital. It's going to be the very bedrock of society. No one denies that. We need to talk about real solutions that do not involve sabotaging our public schools, or take those ideas and try to combine them in the public sector, which people are paying for in their tax dollars. Dr. Mellencamp, if I can get one question in, Mr. Chairman, before you gavel me.
Proceed. We went over on the last one, a minute and
Thank you.
30.
Our watershed roads and bridges, the CHIPS program, the Inflation Reduction Act are expected to create nearly 3 million jobs per year. What steps should be taken to ensure our workforce is adequately prepared to fill those job opportunities?
Thank you for the question. So yes, our roads and bridges need to be rebuilt, and we need skilled labor to do that. And also with everything evolving around new technology and energy efficiency to meet our decarbonization goals, we also need a workforce to build that technology in factories, but also service the technology that we have out in the field. The best infrastructures that we have throughout our country is the community and technical college system, and also other partners that support the community and technical college system too. So you have unions, you have merit shop apprenticeship programs, and also you have very progressive community-based organizations that support individuals going through training, and that all needs to be maintained and supported as we move forward. But if we invest in those activities, TAC did provide a framework of investments for training for individuals who will go unskilled to skilled labor, and while investing in that infrastructure to support the demands that our employers have for highly skilled technology is very much needed. But further, with this rapid changing of technology and skills and utilization of special materials and equipment and bridges and so forth, the current workers that are out there doing the work need a place to come back to in the rural communities and in the urban setting for skill upgrades. And our community technical college systems provide those opportunities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Schweikert's recognized for questions.
Mr. Chairman, before we move forward, can I get a point of clarity on something? My apologies, but I think our good friend from New Jersey misspoke. He made the comment that we voted to kick out our speaker. And if I go back and look at it, it seems as though everybody on that side of the dais voted to remove the speaker, and nobody on this side of the dais did. Is that correct? I just want to clarify that.
That's correct. Mr.
Thank you.
Schweikert?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And forgive me, the classic tyranny of the clock. Can I let me look. And I apologize also to our panel here. As you can see, sometimes the childishness of our politics actually keeps us from actually talking about the actual legislation that you flew all this distance to come talk about. So let's actually have an interesting discussion. Dr. Millikan, just for curious, did you say Baton Rouge?
Yes, Baton Rouge.
I think I have family that's gone to your community college.
Wonderful.
I know.
Yes.
I'm from Arizona, but part of my family's from. I have an unusual fixation, particularly on the good gentleman's piece of legislation here, and that is the concept of jobs are changing, and they're changing so fast. Maybe other than trucking, but even trucking has its own unique, and it's one of the things that concerns me about these are green jobs, but the fact of the matter is, the green job of 8 years ago is different than the one today, and with some of the, if you actually read the literature, the next version of photovoltaic panels are dramatically require different skill sets. If I have anyone who feels competent, is the government structure the most elegant way to teach people the constantly revolving skill set that's required to work with today's tools? For my neighbor sitting next to me, the way I would have repaired a car a decade ago is dramatically different than my wife's Tesla. And it's often one of my fears. What we do in legislation is we lock in last generations of it's one of the problems many of us have with the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act is we're building last generation's technology in a world where the market is for the next generation. And it's the arrogance of those of us in Congress. We think we know things, but we're always a decade behind. And I'm going to start with Mr. Redmond. Okay, so it's a trucking, it's commercial driver's license. But what does the world look like a decade from now? Is it autonomous vehicles? Is it different types of technology? And then move on to others that, if we were to future-proof a piece of legislation like this, what do we need to fixate on?
Right. I mean, thank you, Congressman. Yeah, technology is changing, exactly what you just said. We are experiencing, I get that question quite often about autonomy, autonomous trucks. We're light years away from anything that would be considered full autonomy, because right now everyone says you still have to have a truck driver in the truck. That's just the way it goes. But what that truck can do and what you have to teach does change. So you have to make sure that folks are, our trucking schools are up with the times. But with kind of to your point, there's going to be other, technicians or other folks, skills that we don't even know about 10 years from now are going to need to be taught, either by us or by the gentleman at his community college. So I think it's important that we keep that in mind as we go toward the future of all of our industries, that we just need to be flexible.
Doctor.
Yeah, I mean, what you're explaining is the Hayekian knowledge problem. The government doesn't have the on-the-ground knowledge for every individual person for their own needs. And this is why I pointed out that school choice is one of the best solutions, putting the power into the hands of the parents, let them choose for their own kids because they know their kids better than anybody else. So the Educational Choice for Children Act is one way to return that power to the people who are most affected by those decisions, who have the best incentives to make their decisions right for their own kids' education, and to have the most on-the-ground knowledge when it comes to their kids' educational needs. So the school choice is a good solution to this Hayekian knowledge problem.
Thank you, Doctor. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back instead of consuming more time, but look, if the common goal here is a workforce that prospers in society, I think we're going to have to deal with the reality of the jobs we know today, a couple of years from now, are going to look radically different. And it's a problem of institutional structures, but even the intellect we have up here. We keep making public policy that's static in a dynamic world. And that's actually one of the things I like about the gentleman's legislation, is it's not prescriptive in the way, it actually future-proofs. So with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Winstrup's recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Ranking Member Neal for bringing something up today where he's talking about work improving quality of life for people, and that really is the bottom line. And it brings out the joy of independence in life. The problem we have is too many of the, for example, poverty legislative policies that have come from Democrats have left people in a life of dependence, whereas our policies are more towards a life of independence for people. You know, for the last 60 years or so in our country, basically the mantra was, if you don't get a 4-year degree, then somehow you've failed. But the 4-year degree is not the American dream by any means. And that was a problem for us. Look, I'm a surgeon. I have nothing against 4-year degrees. I have 3 of them, and there's a lot I can do in the operating room. But I can't build that operating room. I can't make the equipment. I can't fix that equipment. You know what? That equipment has to get there somehow, doesn't it, Mr. Redmond? So this is what it takes for America to succeed. That's all levels, because education is workforce development. That's what it should be, so that people can live a life of opportunity. I had an opportunity to go to a college prep Catholic high school. I was allowed to excel there. That's the opportunity that I got. I know a young man, he became valedictorian at that same high school. He's not Catholic, he's Indian. He's a Hindu. I said, why'd you go to this school? He goes, I needed a place where I was allowed to excel. And that opportunity came. I think of great educators like Jaime Escalante, if you know who that is. Watch Stand and Deliver about his life, where he said, the children will rise to the level of their expectations. People want the choice to go to a place where there are expectations and therefore opportunity afterwards. That's what choice provides us. I chair the select subcommittee on the pandemic, and we're looking at things like school closures And you know, we had some schools closed when the school down the street was open. And no plan from those schools to catch the kids up. None whatsoever. This is a problem. I remember sitting down with leadership of my local NAACP, and I asked them, where are you on school choice? Oh, we're against it. No, we're against it. Where do your kids go to school? Both of them, their kids were in private schools. The hypocrisy is unbelievable. I remember during the summer of the riots, I met with a group of African-American businessmen, some I knew from college, et cetera. And I asked them about what they thought on school choice. And one said, oh, no. Kids want to go to school where their friends are, and that's what they want to do, and that's what they should do and be able to do. Another guy, he played basketball at Xavier, he said, I don't want anyone telling me where my kids have to go to school. Another one played at the University of Cincinnati. He said, my parents sent me to Catholic school till 5th grade. I wore the uniform and everything. I begged them to let me go with my friends at the local school. He said, I wasn't there 2 weeks, and I said, get me the heck out of here, and I went right back to that school. That's the reality, folks. And you know what? Choice will make public schools have to be more competitive. And that's what we want. But in that vein, because I do want to ask a question in my time, but I'm so glad to talk about that. I'm so passionate about this stuff. I've been involved with a private entity that helps kids get an opportunity to go to private Catholic schools starting in 4th grade through high school, through college, even housing where they're mentored if that's the situation and their parents say, our home is not the best place for my child. These are successful programs. Doctors, lawyers, educators, Super Bowl champions, all of that has come out of that program. But I want to ask Mr. DeAngelis, what is the effect of school choice in rural areas? Because I have a large rural population. In the rural areas of the country where there may not be a lot of K through 12 alternatives, can you talk about the benefits of the ECCA, the Expanding Community College Apprenticeships program for these rural areas?
Yeah, if you look at states like Florida, they have rural areas too. According to Step Up for Students, over the past couple of decades since they've expanded private school choice in that state, the number of private education providers has doubled in the rural areas. So when you build it, they will come. You put the money into the hands of families, more providers are going to respond to that demand, and especially if you allow for non-private school tuition expenses as well. It's another good reason why expanding 529 accounts to other expenses would also be a good idea for rural areas where you don't have to start another brick and mortar private school in order to use the program. And then look, the worst case scenario is that nothing changes in a rural area. If you don't have a lot of private options and they don't sprout up immediately, well then if you like your public school, you can keep your public school, but for real this time, and the public schools will improve in response to competition over time. 10 out of 11 studies from Florida find that, 26 out of 29 nationally find positive effects of school choice competition. And I just gotta mention, because you mentioned during the COVID era, a peer-reviewed study by Michael Hartney and Leslie Finger in 2021 found that in places that had more Catholic schools nearby, the public schools were more likely to open their doors for business too. Why? Because they had an incentive, because families could actually vote with their feet elsewhere. They thought, well, maybe I should, if I don't want to bleed enrollment, maybe I should open my doors for business. And they found that after controlling for a ton of different background characteristics, including political persuasions in the areas as well. So we have so much evidence on the side of education freedom, and it's just a logical thing to do. The parents are in the best position to make these decisions.
Thank you. Yield back.
Mr. Thompson is recognized for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. Dr. Melancon, thank you for being here. Thank you for your good work. And I particularly appreciate your comments on the importance of community colleges and vocational and trade schools. I think that's very important. And I'm a product of community college myself. Well, I didn't technically go to a trade school. I went to a community college to learn how to weld. And I took that interest in education and what I learned, I used it in my job as a maintenance supervisor for a major winery in my hometown. But it ignited an interest in education for me, and I went on to a 4-year college and got a couple of degrees. And I hope, and it helped me. It helped me. Provided more opportunities for me and provided a better living. So I hope in Congress, in this committee and in Congress in the whole, that we can work together in a bipartisan way to make it easier for young people to pursue these pathways to well-paying jobs. And I'd like to ask you about some of the work we did in this committee last year. You mentioned them in your testimony. We worked hard to ensure that the investments we made last year, particularly the Inflation Reduction Act, but also the Infrastructure Bill and the CHIPS Act, would improve economic mobility for all Americans. And a big part of your work is identifying what you call the mismatch between workers we need and the skills our current workforce has. Can you talk a little more about what sort of jobs are being created by the Inflation Reduction Act and what skills are needed for these jobs?
Yes, thank you. So, as I mentioned before, with the Inflation Reduction Act has brought on new technology to legacy crafts. For example, in my state of Louisiana and in Baton Rouge, a lot has gone on to carbon capture technology and the desire to use different forms of hydrogen, more so of the blue-green hydrogen. That has brought on the need for more PV installers, more use for wind and energy. And as a welder, you are building out new infrastructure inside the plant for this new carbon capture technology. You got to fabricate that equipment for this decarbonization work, and then also on the platforms for the wind turbines. So that has grown the desire for, I call legacy skill crafts, the welders, pipe fitters, instrument techs. But at the same time, those skills need to be upgraded to the different processes. Might be using different materials, different type of composites, and that increased knowledge also increased in pay of a good quality job. So the beauty of that, of increasing economic base for all in a tight labor market, what we have found out is that employers are willing to take chances on individuals who typically wouldn't receive a referral from the softball team or from the out from the hunting camp. They're willing to work with community college or work in diverse community-based organizations, and that has opened the door for people to get into these new green jobs and actually currently manufacturing petrochemical jobs throughout the South.
Thank you. And you mentioned better pay. Do you expect that the jobs created by the IRA, the CHIPS Act, and the Infrastructure Bill to pay higher wages than average?
Yes, so it has been documented. I think at least 11% is higher wages. A majority of these jobs are pretty much good jobs, but I think also these jobs are actually tacked on with the defined apprenticeship programs, and you pretty much get paid as the credentials you earn. You also increase in pay. So yes, the pay scale has been increased dramatically with this investment.
A lot of the education stuff is out of our lane in this committee, but in general, do you think Congress should increase investment in career and technical education?
Yes, like I stated before in my testimony, there has been cutbacks since the past 20 years, adult education, CTE programs, and the community technical college has basically received a haircut. At the same time, the mismatch of the labor has also increased, and then the demand for high quality skilled labor to be forward. A lot of these crafts still need a base knowledge, and you need to get a base knowledge to go into to these employment sectors. And then from there, the employers can help accelerate their training. But employers can't deal with base knowledge. They actually need to be somewhat productive and safe on the job site.
Thank you. And then just in closing, do you see the investments we made in the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Bill, helping in rural areas?
Very much so, especially when those community technical colleges have been very strategic of how to leverage their community programs and make them the centers of excellence. For example, you have a CDL driving program with a heavy equipment driving program, get them dual certified, and they're more able to earn more and be more productive on the job site.
Thank you very much. Yield back.
Mr. Ferguson is recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to our witnesses, thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate y'all's time and expertise. I always look at the lens, look at life through the lens of what our people back home really want. And it doesn't matter where you come from or what part of the world you come from here. People want a good job where they can take care of their families. They want to come home to a decent, safe place to live after a hard day's work. They want their children educated, and they want to be left alone by DC so that they can be who they want to in this great country. Education is at the forefront of that. We have seen a tremendous growth in jobs thanks to the manufacturing boom and the technology investment from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. My dear friend from New Jersey referenced this, didn't call it by name, but we've seen that, and we should be investing more in America, and we should be doing things that make America more competitive around the world. The key to that, though, is to make sure that we've got a workforce that's ready to go. And I've seen for far too long, when we tell every kid there's only one pathway in education, there's only one way to go, that we wind up with a less competitive global workforce. So investments in trade, technical colleges, the charter schools, we need a diversity of options. We've raised 6 kids. They've all gone different directions. Some into college, some into the military, some into technical schools, everything from logistics to cybersecurity to the arts. We've got it covered. And the one thing I can tell you is that sometimes public education was the right choice for a child. Sometimes it was private education. But as a parent, I want choices for my kids, just as millions upon millions of Americans do. Mr. DeAngelis, it was interesting you talked about rural communities, because there's a real challenge when you look at, if you're in a rural community, you've got one choice. It's a public school system, okay? There may be a small private school, but it's the public schools. How important is it that we could use these funds to improve the technology piece of what we're doing in rural schools, where they may not have the tax base to go in and make the investment that they need to be competitive with other schools?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'll just point out the 9 most rural states already have some form of private school choice. West Virginia being one of them, actually the first state to be the one to go all in on school choice with universal eligibility back in 2021. But I think it's super important for any of these proposals to allow for non-private school tuition expenses as well, as to maximize the flexibility and customization on the part of the parent, but also to allow for more innovation in the public school sector and the private school sector as well. If you look at the state level bills that are passing, a lot of them are called education savings accounts that you can use it like a voucher for a private school, but you could also use it for these micro schools or pandemic pods, or even just homeschool curriculum and other expenses. So it really takes us from school choice to education choice and maximizes flexibility. I think that's the way to do it.
Thank you. Mr. Rudman, you told an amazing story about a young man. He must have been pretty stout to pick you up and throw you around. But you talked about his success and growing a business, and you talked about him. But can you speak for just a minute about the impact that he had on so many other families because he provided jobs for them?
So there's two folds to that. Thank you, Congressman, by the way, for that question. There's 2 parts to that, to my answer. One is not only did he provide jobs for the folks that work for him, but he also provided mentorship back to some of my students. So if whenever I had a student who was struggling and wasn't sure they were gonna make it, there were times I would sit them down and counsel with them, and I would literally put my cell phone out on the table and call him. I can still do that today. Call him, and he'll pick up the phone and goes, "Brother Jerome, what are you doing?" And he's excited, and then he says, "You got another one for me?" I said, "Yes, I do." And he just explains how he made it, and he even discloses his income, and so on and so forth.
Mr. Redmond, one final question. You deal with things that stick to the ground, which are trucks. Mm-hmm. Do you think a modification of this plan to expand it into other areas, say for airline pilots, do you think that would be helpful as well?
Well, anything that's going to help, anything that would help folks utilize these funds for more educational purposes or more choice, I think is a good thing. But mainly, I speak mostly for my industry. So,
thank you for that. Yield back.
Mr. Estes is recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all our witnesses for being here for today's important hearing. Education, the linchpin of a stable and flourishing life. I'm sure each of us here can attest to the power of education in our own lives and have seen numerous examples in our districts of the difference solid education and professional training can make. But too many of our schools are now failing in their mission to deliver a quality education. In their place, we've seen countless new options arise and grow in popularity, from charter schools to private education to education savings accounts that help with homeschooling expenses. Many of these options cost money, and as we all know, money's now tight, particularly thanks to Bidenomics. As been mentioned many times before, since President Biden took office, prices have increased 17.7% and real wages have declined 3.9%. On top of the economic challenges, there's been a concerted effort by many Democrats to limit K through 12 education opportunities. In recent years, Republican efforts to expand coverage for additional K through 12 expenses in 529 accounts have been thwarted first by Senate Democrats and later by Speaker Pelosi, despite unanimous bipartisan support from this committee. Expanding coverage of 529 accounts is not the only way we can make education more accessible and affordable to students and families. There are numerous education tax incentives and tax credits being piloted throughout the country, the most effective of which can be adopted by various states. In Kansas, for example, we have tax credit for low-income student scholarship program that incentivizes charitable support for scholarship granting organizations, or SGOs, that help power private schools. By utilizing this tax credit, Kansas enjoy a reduced income tax liability on their state income tax while helping connect low-income students to a quality education. The program powers schools like Urban Preparatory in Wichita, a transformative K through 12 private school I visited that serves over 120 students. Last year, they were recognized as finalists for the Yaz Prize, which honors new and innovative approaches to education. 99% of urban prep students are on scholarship, funded largely by the tax credit scholarship program for low-income students. Urban Prep, like many other schools across the country, is giving low-income students new opportunities that without tax credits would be unattainable. Dr. DeAngelis, for many years, children in Kansas have benefited from the tax scholarship programs. However, there's now a growing sentiment that private schools should not be allowed to benefit from these scholarships. Can you explain how these scholarships were derived? Are they comprised entirely of public funds or private funds? And what's your thoughts on use of public funds only for private or for public schools?
Well, what's interesting about this argument that public funds are for public schools, well, there's no such thing as public funds. They're called taxpayer dollars. But then a lot of the people who oppose public funds for private institutions when it comes to K through 12 education, they support it for higher education with Pell Grants, for pre-K like the Head Start program, with food stamps going to private institutions that are grocery stores, Medicaid dollars that can be used at private, even religious hospitals if you want. Section 8 housing vouchers are all good, fine and dandy when it comes to housing, but not K through 12 education. It's totally strange. But look, these are private dollars with the tax credit scholarship program because they're donations. And if you look at the Supreme Court precedent on this with ACSTO versus Wynn in 2011, they ruled with common sense that private dollars remain private until they enter the tax collector's hands. So this isn't public money. That talking point is moot. It's totally garbage if you look at the logical inconsistency with so many people who repeat this, but then support public going to private, everything else. And the beneficiaries of this funding is not the institutions themselves, the private schools. It's the individual families who get a choice in the matter. And if you like your public school, you can continue to go there. But if not, families need the choice to be able to take that funding meant for their child to the education provider that works best for them. That could be a private school, could be a home-based education option, and so on. But that decision is up to the parents.
Well, that's great. I mean, we've continued to see that the shopping mall approach to education has only led to lower standards and rigor in curricula. Do you think the competition would help public schools move back towards higher standards? And how will they be able to accomplish these changes and rise to the competition if they have less funds due to the school's choice policies?
Yeah, on a per student basis, the public schools actually end up with more funding per student because they lose some of the funding associated with the scholarship, of course, if a family chooses to leave. But if not, or even if they do, schools are funded only partially based on enrollment counts. And if the scholarship is less than the total amount spent in the public schools, they get to keep thousands of dollars for students who are no longer educating. Just imagine if you stopped shopping at Walmart and you went to what's the other grocery store you like? Sprouts or Publix, and Walmart got to keep half your grocery funding in perpetuity. That would be a great deal for Walmart, wouldn't make a lot of sense. It's similarly a good deal for the public schools. They get to keep any money at all for students who are no longer educating. They benefit on a per student basis, and competition is a rising tide that lifts all boats. We see this in every other industry. We see it in K-12 education as well. We have so much evidence. If those fear-mongering about school choice had any evidence, they'd present it. It doesn't exist. 26 of 29 studies are positive. School choice, better outcomes in the public schools.
Great, thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Davis is recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I also want to thank all of our witnesses. You know, I strongly support modernizing our tax policy to help students and workers get the education they need. There are so many improvements that we should be making, but rewarding wealthy families for taking their children out of school is not one of those. There are so many amazing charitable organizations. And rather than advancing policies supporting all charities, today's hearing seemed to myopically supercharge only given to those privatized education programs. Dr. Melican, thank you for highlighting the importance of a focus on equity and citing the example of the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board's Equity Task Force. To help employers and workers improve their training, I have two bills with Representative Fenstra that would more than double the amount of non-taxable education and training assistance employers who could provide this to their workers. Specifically, employers could pay for up to $12,000 for workers to get upskilling and retraining without taxing those benefits. And we're pleased to have worked with Mr. Smith on these issues in the past. Given your work with a range of businesses and workers, do you see helping incumbent workers improve their skills so they can change with the nature of the jobs as complementary to the other training programs that you mentioned?
Yes, Congressman Davis, thank you so much, and thank you for your service. The Work Opportunity Tax Credit is a viable tool for training incumbent workers, especially those who've been kind of left out of the workforce pipeline, so returning veterans, individuals on public assistance. And what I like about what the Work Opportunity Tax Credit does, it incentivizes employers to invest in skills of their incumbent workers. Employers kind of have a bad trend of firing knowledge and hiring new knowledge. And the Work Opportunity Tax Credit really kind of goes by the old adage, reward goes to those who do the work. But it is a cost on the employer, so I'm good to see they have some incentives to train, because when you take somebody off production or off billable hours, that's a cost to them. But for them to get some type of benefit for training them to go to training is a huge benefit. And it actually opens this pipeline of a tight labor market, because they're hiring now just for will, and then they'll try to bring them on quickly and hire, and then train them up on their skill side. And this gives employer a strong benefit for that.
Let me just say that I support choice, but I want the choice to be as good as the base. And I want the base to be as complementary and as good as the choice. You're familiar with the Illinois city and state junior college or community college system.
Yes, sir.
What's the basic difference in the programs that one set of institutions provide and the other institutions provide?
Well, there's a variety of different schools. So we're actually doing some work with IGEN, that's the Illinois Green Economy Network, and that's a consortium of community colleges just focusing on greening their curriculum as right now. So inside a community college, there's centers of excellence what's inside them. One may have a focus on automotive, another one may have a focus on healthcare within the same jurisdiction, but really it's depending on what those employer needs are within that sector. And that really drives, not only in Illinois, but really across the country, how there's diversity of skill training that goes across different sectors or at different campuses.
Thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Smucker's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to submit for the record and ask unanimous approval to have this included. The roll call for House Resolution 757.
Without objection.
And this is the roll call on agreeing to the resolution to vacate the House. And my friend, Mr. Ferguson, brought this up, but I do want to make it clear that every single member, Democrat member of this committee, according to this roll call, voted to vacate the Speaker's office and through the House in the chaos, along with no members of the Republican side of this committee. 8 other Republican members.
The gentleman yield?
Sure.
I have cast votes 18 times for Speaker of the House, and never once has a Democrat voted for a Republican candidate to be the Speaker, nor vice versa. You vote the party line. That's what we did. We voted for Hakeem Jeffries.
Yeah.
Trying to change this
reclaiming my time, and thank you to the ranking member, but the record is what it is. Every single Democrat member voted to vacate the Speaker, and I think are enjoying the chaos. But you ought to start thinking about a different narrative. You like talking about this, but we're going to have a new Speaker very soon, hopefully today, and you're going to need to have a new narrative here. No, I want to get back to this. This is a really important topic today, and I really appreciate the chairman talking about this today. You know, we want to ensure that every child in America has the opportunity for a great education. And that can be a public school. There are great public schools. There are bad public schools. It can be a charter school. There are good and bad charter schools. It can be private schools, whatever it may be. And every policy regarding education that we're considering ought to look at supporting quality schools no matter where that occurs. I was the chairman of the Education Committee in Pennsylvania, and Ms. Sedlar, I so much appreciate your work to ensure that every child does have that access in Pennsylvania. And we worked on these policies. I'm proud of what we've done in Pennsylvania, the EITC, and I agree with you. It's not enough. We should be doing more. Ms. Varma, your story, education, very important to me as well. And I have a family of 12 kids. I have 11 siblings, as you do, so we have that in common. But education, very, very critical. And just want to make a few points. One is the chairman's bill on 529s, expanding them to career tech, very, very important. We ought to be doing that. And then Mr. Smith, Adrian Smith's bill that provides a federal tax credit for K through 12 is important as well. And I talk about in Pennsylvania, you know, we have a lot of really great institutions of higher education, colleges, universities, everything, you know, all types of colleges and universities. And it's a perfect example of why choice works and how it works. Parents decide what is best for their child based on what the child wants to do, chooses the school that works best for them. And we ought to be applying that in K through 12 as well. And this is what Adrian Smith's bill does. It's very, very important. And then I want to talk a little bit about workforce development. And I've had a similar bill to Adrian's. It also included a workforce development piece. It would create a federal tax credit for workforce development. So just like the EITC program in Pennsylvania, a company decides or an individual decides to contribute to career technical schools, apprenticeship programs, and so on, they receive a tax credit for doing so. I think it's really, really important we do that. I was a business owner myself for a number of years, understand today that every business is looking for people. And by the way, it's really important. We're in a bad fiscal trajectory in the country. I spend time thinking about this. It's really important we get our economy growing. We need workers to do that. I do want a really quick question. Mr. Redmond, do you know how much we spend in the U.S. annually on traditional higher education on four-year degrees?
I do not have the answer to that.
$197 billion. Do you know how much we spend on programs that help support federal workforce programs and career education, techno education programs?
No, sir.
About $4 billion annually on WIOA and $1.4 billion in federal support. Think about that. $5.4 billion for career and technical compared to $197 billion for four-year degrees. Now, I wouldn't discourage a four-year degree. It's important, but think about the need to reconfigure and rebalance where we place our priorities. So I think it's really important to do this. I have a bill today as well that would create a tax credit. And I think when you look at the disparity in where we're putting our focus and our federal dollars, taxpayer dollars, as you had mentioned, it's really important that we pass something like this as well. So thank you to each of you for being here today. Your stories are amazing and compelling. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Miller is recognized for questions.
Thank you, Chairman Smith and Ranking Member, and thank all of you for being here today. As a mother and a grandmother, I know the importance of allowing parents to choose which schools are best for their children and their own unique skills. When I was in college, I made the choice to certified to teach on a secondary level, which means middle school and high school. I learned how to teach English and history and math and all of those things that we really thought was so important. And those have evolved to STEM and STEAM and other curriculums as we move forward. Life has its own twists and turns. I ended up in real estate as opposed to being a teacher, but I volunteered in the school system for 17 years. And believe me, when you walk the halls of middle school, those hormones are alive and well today, just like they were when I learned how to teach all those years ago. Dr. DeAngelis, thank you for highlighting my state in your testimony and how we provide parents with one of the most expansive education savings account program in the country. This program is called the Hope Scholarship Program, and it has an eligibility rate of 93% across all students in my state, making West Virginia a leader in giving parents the opportunity to build an individual learning experience that will work best for their child. I already think of you as Dr. D. I don't know if that's happened to you before or not. We have all seen how radical woke ideology, which really sloughs over history and civics and all of those other things, but does include gender and sexual orientation, has made its way into our children's curriculum in school. You know, it's a good thing that parents at least can contain their children exposure at school. I mean, at home. In your opinion, how do you see school choice as a way to protect our children from the radical and damaging ideology of the left?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. Too many schools are focusing on indoctrination, not education. And the best solution to this problem is to allow the families to choose for their own kids. Every other so-called solution from the top down is within the one-size-fits-all system that by definition is never going to meet the needs of individual families. Schooling is a way to outsource partially the raising of your children. And in the current system that we force families based on their zip code into, you have one group of parents, or even a special interest more likely, controlling the minds of other people's children with that in that system. The only way forward through freedom as opposed to force is from the bottom up, allowing families to choose schools that align with their own values. That's the only way out of this mess where you're not having some parents control how to raise other people's children. So I think we should all be able to agree, left and right. If you want to go to a school that aligns with your values with this curriculum or that curriculum, it shouldn't matter what that is. but parents should be able to choose for their own children. So I think this is the best solution. There are other pieces of legislation that could be banning certain concepts or promoting other concepts, and that could be moving the ball in the right direction. But we've seen in so many states, at the state level at least, that this is a unenforceable policy in some cases. We have videos coming out from Accuracy in Media in red states that have banned CRT, for example, where the public school officials are admitting on camera in undercover video that they're going to do it anyway. They're not going to call it CRT. They'll call it social emotional learning, or they'll call it student mental health services. And at the end of the day, this should be up to the parents for their own kids anyway.
You are so right. Mr. Redmond, I'd really like to meet Pops and Hattie. I know I'd want to give them a big hug, because didn't they do a good job? And thank you for being here. You know, in my home state of West Virginia, as well as across the country, businesses are facing crippling shortages of not having enough people in the workforce, and across all of the major industries. And for too long, we have been enabling people to stay at home instead of go back to work. The Biden administration's failure to address inflation and the rising cost of obtaining education have made vocational and technical colleges increasingly out of reach for my West Virginians who might want to learn high-demand skills in order to enter the workforce. School systems have changed now. I think that they should have allowed to continue teaching life skills, middle school, home ec, shop. Wouldn't it be nice if somebody, when they came there, they knew what a Phillips screwdriver was, or why there were 3 wires in a box, before they move on in their life? And I think that should happen in middle school. In your opinion, how would expanding 529 accounts to include workforce training programs like your American truck training help our labor force get back to the pre-pandemic employment levels?
Well, thank you, Congresswoman. It's basically what we've been talking about all this time. It's about giving folks a choice. You know, I'm full of stories, so here comes another. There was a gentleman named Gerald that came to my school who got a 4-year degree, but you know, he didn't have. It was really tough for him to come to school, but he ended up coming to school and utilizing you know, what he had to in fact get his commercial driver's license. And had he had something like 529, it would have been not such torture for him to come to school. If he had that extra something, even if it was half his tuition, it would have been not such a struggle for him. And I see that all the time, where folks are struggling, trying to make ends meet, and also trying to pay for vocational training, because let's face it, like we've all discussed, that, you know, college is just, let's be honest, it's just not for everyone, you know, and we gotta give folks more opportunities. And so I just don't see the point in anyone who could see that how this could not benefit our country and the folks who need help.
Thank you. A quorum call has been called. I intend to proceed with the hearing for as long as possible before recessing for members to vote in the election of a speaker. At that time, the committee will stand in recess subject to the call of the chair, and we will reconvene at the conclusion of the speaker election process. Ms. Sanchez is recognized for questions.
Yes, I'd like to yield 10 seconds to my colleague, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you very much. I just think it was inappropriate that the gentleman from Pennsylvania suggested that some of us are enjoying the dysfunction around your speaker's election. It's beyond the pale. We came here just like all of you to get things done, and we haven't gotten anything done in the last 3 weeks. We're as disheartened by this as I'm sure the responsible members on your side of the aisle are as well. And please don't put words in my mouth or my colleague's mouth. Thank you. I'll yield back to Ms. Sanchez.
Reclaiming my time, and I couldn't agree with Mr. Thompson more. It's not fun sitting around waiting for you guys to get your act together in terms of election of a speaker. And I find it incredibly fitting that we're talking about schools and education today, because I'd like to start my remarks with a little lesson called personal responsibility. My dad, who is an immigrant with roughly a 6th grade education, raised 7 children who all went and graduated college. And all of us are public school products. Every single one of us went to public schools. And he didn't have a lot of education, but he was a really wise man because he had a lot of life lessons. And he used to say, when you make a mistake, and we all make many mistakes over the course of our lifetime, but admit it. Just admit you made the mistake. Learn from it and be better moving forward. And yet repeatedly, my Republican colleagues today have tried to lay the blame for the chaos, the inaction, and the inability for the Republicans to govern. They're trying to lay it at the feet of the Democrats. So I want to correct the record with just a few facts. First fact, it's a fact that Republicans are in the majority and that they changed the rules this Congress to allow a single member to raise a motion to vacate the Speaker. That's a fact. Second, it was a Republican, Mr. Gates of Florida, who actually moved to vacate Speaker McCarthy. That is the second fact. So you poured the gasoline and you lit the match, and now you're unhappy with the outcome and you want to blame the Democrats for that? So how is it that we're to blame for a mess that you've created? We voted against the rule change, and we didn't raise the motion to vacate the Speaker. You guys are blaming us because we didn't vote for Speaker McCarthy? Well, how many of you ever voted for Speaker Pelosi or would ever vote for Speaker Pelosi? It's not the Democrats' responsibility to choose your leader. That's your responsibility. You are the majority, so own your mistakes. Take a long, hard look at yourselves in the mirror and admit that you screwed up and move on and be better. But you keep screwing up. And, you know, the statement that the chairman made at the beginning of this hearing that the Democrats are to blame for this whole chaos and mess, that is the very definition of a failure to take responsibility for your actions. But that doesn't really surprise me because it fits this pattern, a pattern whereby Republicans break things and then they try to blame someone else. So 3 weeks after House Republicans ousted their speaker and thus far have failed to elect a new one, here we are. And considering that legislative business on the floor has ground to a halt, today's hearing is hardly business as usual. Instead, the committee is discussing policies that would gut public school funding and abandon civil rights and disability protections for some of our nation's school children. Very nice. And I consider this hearing to be nothing but a short-sighted attempt to distract American families from the complete chaos that Republicans have embraced while they are in charge of this House. And this is no way to lead or to govern or to legislate. With the Republican-controlled House utterly paralyzed by your inaction, I want to look back at what the Democrats managed to achieve when we were in power last Congress with roughly the same margin of a majority. The bipartisan infrastructure law was a once-in-a-generation investment in safer and more equitable transportation and infrastructure. The CHIPS and Science Act provided billions in grants, loans, loan guarantees, and investment tax credits to rebuild America's semiconductor manufacturing capacity and bolster a domestic supply chain. And spearheaded by this tax writing committee, the Inflation Reduction Act made transformational investments in the fight against climate change. The Inflation Reduction Act is working to deliver lower energy costs for consumers across the US, and the law's landmark investments in clean energy are empowering American workers with good-paying jobs. Dr. Melanson, I appreciate your efforts to help the Department of Energy implement the Inflation Reduction Act. And considering your expertise leading workforce development initiatives, how specifically has the Inflation Reduction Act improved the clean energy talent pipeline? Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, but the last questioner on that side got a minute and a half over. I would like an opportunity to have the witness answer the question.
I was giving you the time. I did not take anything away. You have up to a minute 30 because the other one went a minute 30.
I appreciate that even-handedness. It's unusual, but it's appreciated.
So the Inflation Reduction Act has done a lot on generating new jobs in the in the variety of factors of fighting climate change. For example, the incentives for using mini splits and heat pumps has provided, training for current HVAC technicians to learn this new technology, but also provided more opportunities for trucking, transportation, warehousing of the growth of mini splits and the utilization of heat pumps throughout the U.S. Like I mentioned before, 27% growth in the EV sector of automotive. That's just from 2021 to 2022. And then also further growth in once the halo, the hydrogen hubs have now been identified and they've been awarded through the hydrogen growth of infrastructure throughout the U.S. Hydrogen fuel cars and trucks, heavy trucks will be able to go on the road and be fueled up to meet that technology change. So that's not taking away from diesel and your standard fuels, but also is future-proofing the current fuel system that's out there to help on our carbonization goals and workforce goals as we move forward.
I thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Murphy's recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would agree we have people on both sides of our aisle that we'd like to get rid of. But from that point, I'll just give a quick story. My dad passed away when I was young, and she was hell-bent when I was in the 4th grade to send me to Catholic school, and they put me in the 5th grade. And me and Sister Mary Regina, after 6 weeks, both decided we'd be better back in public school. I want to give a different perspective on what we're talking about here. The most overused phrase today is the, quote, root causes of all this. But I'd actually like us to go back and look and see why this is. Why is this the big fight between public school, private school, et cetera, et cetera? They used to work in harmony many, many years ago. Let us take our time capsule back to go to 1965 and the Great Society programs, when Lyndon Johnson began the destruction of the nuclear family. Remember, where does education start? It starts in the home. Absolutely starts in the home. And yes, single mom helped me as much as she could, but she actually wanted me to have a good education. So since that time, the nuclear family has been destroyed, actually disproportionately, sadly enough, in minority communities. And so now what we're doing is that we're having kids who are not then in as much, their parent is not much invested in their child as our parents formerly were. That's a number one reason we're having problems in schools. Number one. And you know, I still see patients, and I will say, I see predominantly Medicaid patients, and whenever I see a child, I ask mom, is dad involved? And 80% say no. 80% say no. And so here we are. The kid can't even get out of the house with backing, much less go to a school. Now, yes, that single mother oftentimes wants the best for their child. And regardless of where they're raising that child, they should be able, regardless of their income, where they were raising the child, their poverty level, et cetera, send that child to a place where he or she would have a better life than what they have, period, point blank. So my wonderful colleague across the aisle talked about crises, that we create crises. It's absolutely not. This crisis was created 50 years ago, and now we're managing it further and further and further as we get into this time. Now public schools, and so much, I was on the board of trustees of a college. What did they teach? It's called microaggressions. It's caused victimization, such to the fact when kids now get out employed, finally are employed, they're getting kicked out in the first 2 weeks of their job. Business Week, I believe it was, about a month ago, said 12% of Gen Zers are getting kicked out, fired in the first 2 weeks because they're being offended. Let's go back and we look at the people who actually cause these problems. Yeah, we need a workforce, but we can't get kids, if they quit in junior high school, who should have a future doing a good job as a truck driver, as a diesel operator, a mechanic or somebody, getting jobs. But you can't do that when you've destroyed the family. You can't do that no matter what tax incentive is offered, no matter how much money you pour into a public school, no matter how it's squandered, how much money you spend on a child, it starts in the home. And I don't know how we fix that in Congress, because we screwed it up 50 years ago. And I don't know how you put the genie back in that bottle. So You know, guys, I'm not going to ask a question because I really don't even know where to start with this. But I think our colleges and universities, sadly enough, we're teaching the mantra that everybody has to go get a 4-year education. And by that fact also, so many of our degree programs, physical therapy, nurse practitioner, I can talk about these medical communities, all require doctorates. They're killing kids with tuition when they don't need it. And so we have so many kids just going to college, then at 2 years, they're flunking out. And they're going back to community college, which is where they should have started to begin with, but then they have a massive, massive debt required for tuition. So I applaud you, all of you, regardless of whatever your witnesses are, because I think you're here with the right heart. The problem, sadly enough, is in our home, is in the lack of the desire for a good education in our home and the structural problems created by the Great Society programs. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Mr. Hearn is recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing today, and thank you to all the witnesses for joining us here. Tax advantage accounts are a tremendous benefit to hardworking Americans. Tax advantage accounts help Americans save for retirement, future health issues, and children's education. Republicans' Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017 expanded tax advantage education savings account, known as 529 accounts, to include K through 12 tuition. However, Congress can and should do more to help hardworking Americans afford everyday education costs. At a time when inflation is hurting the American people and the dollar's being stretched thin, 529 accounts need to be expanded to make K through 12 education more affordable. That is why today I'm introducing the Student Empowerment Act, which allows all students, including public, private, and religious schools students, to use 529 accounts to cover eligible education expenses, such as tutoring, standardized testing fees, and educational expenses, therapies for students with disabilities, among other educational expenses. The Student Empowerment Act reincorporates homeschool students as equally to use a 529 savings account for educational expenses, ensuring all families can use these tax advantage accounts to pay for their children's elementary and secondary education. In a study from Brookings, average fall 2021 math test scores in grades 3 through 8 were an average 0.24 standard deviations lower relative to the same grade peers in fall 2019, while reading test scores were an average 0.14 standard deviations lower. The drop in test scores should be concerning to all Americans. To compare, math scores dropped a 0.17 standard deviations in 1 year from New Orleans evacuees after Hurricane Katrina. In a recent study from Tutor.com, demand for tutoring has skyrocketed 105% post-COVID as families cope with their children's learning loss. This new data suggests that parents are shelling out more of their hard-earned money to get children back on track. Congress should help these families by easing the financial burden of their children's learning loss. My bill is a step in the right direction, providing families with eligibility to pay for tutoring using a tax advantage 529 plan. Mr. DeAngelis, can you tell us why it's a good idea to expand 529 accounts beyond 12 through K to cover eligible education expenses such as tutoring, standardized testing, fees, and educational therapies for students with disabilities, among other educational expenses?
Absolutely, thank you for the question. Schooling is just one way to get to an education, and some people in the homeschool community would actually argue that schooling in some ways, if it's not done right, could be antithetical to education. So expanding the expenses to allow for maximum customization on the part of the parents is a great step in the right direction towards empowering parents and empowering families to get the best education for their kid. That could be in a brick and mortar school, but tutoring is also, especially with supplemental tutoring, can lead to better outcomes for students as well. So we should allow for maximum flexibility, customization. This is a really good way to do that. And the benefits of these types of programs aren't limited to standardized test scores being improved. That's obviously a benefit. But another benefit could be non-academic, including reductions in crime later on in life, more of less likely to engage in activities that lead to teenage pregnancies as kids, as the previous congressman brought up as well. There's a study from New York City Harlem Children's Zone that found that winning a lottery to attend a charter school in New York City reduced the likelihood of teenage pregnancies by 59%. And I've also done a study on the topic from Milwaukee, finding that getting a voucher to go to a private school in Milwaukee, following those students later on in life until they were about 25 to 30 years of age, had huge reductions on the likelihood of them committing crimes, and also reduced the likelihood of paternity suits by about 38%. So these are all reasons why we should expand education freedom, not limit it. And you guys are in a great position to do that. And thank you for introducing the bill.
I recently read a report that said that you can tie direct incarceration rates back to how people read in the 3rd grade. And so we're certainly not heading in the right direction. We need to do everything in our power to change that. Ms. Sedlar, in your testimony, you say there's no excuse not to empower every family with the options necessary to make the choices that will change their children's lives, especially as the countries continue to strive to recover from the generational learning loss after COVID-19 pandemic. Do you believe 529 expansion beyond K through 12 tuition to be a worthy option?
Of course I do. I think that parents can definitely band together and utilize that functionality to improve their children's education, add on to that children's education. We've had a lot of success in Pennsylvania with some pods that have remained, some hybrid homeschool situations. So allowing those out-of-the-box modalities are critical in assisting our students.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Moore is recognized for questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and I do want to thank our panel for joining us today for this very important hearing. I want to ask a question really very quickly of you, Mr. Melancon, with the National Skills Coalition. The Joint Economic Committee said that we had testimony before that committee that said that there's not really a energy-related something or another, that these really are an aggregation of skill sets that we're already promoting. Like you talked about trucking, HVAC workers, and I'm wondering, plumbers, electrical workers, welders. How do you, just very quickly, because I have other questions for others, what is the plan to take advantage of this critical mass of people who are out there? They don't necessarily know that these energy-related opportunities exist, and to be able to steer people in the direction without wasting a lot of time and money.
Well, the key opportunity is just bringing exposure. So it's just working in the local communities and working with the employers, and also with the the K through 12 system, and also with your post-secondary system, is expose parents and other young adults about these career pathways. But traditionally, there are going to be traditional crafts that just have a future side to them, and like electrical, solar, and so forth. So it's just bringing exposure. I'm a big fan of the service corps that the Department of Energy has just deployed out on that. That brings exposure to kids and adults about these green opportunities.
Thank you so much for that. I do want to share with the committee that I hail from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And so very clearly, I was in the state legislature in 1989 when we voted for school choice. I voted for it. And I'm very, very close personal friends with people like Dr. Howard Fuller, with the late, great State Representative Polly Williams, people who took the initiative to put this program together. Back in college at Marquette University, Reverend Father Virgil Bloom had me doing research on school choice, so I know an awful lot about it. Now, having said that, just let me say this. Dr. DeAngelis, I couldn't agree with you more, that the biggest problem with public schooling is the feudalistic system that it's based on. You know, if you live in 53206 in Milwaukee, North Division High School, where I went to high school, you know, you're gonna get to the 11th grade like I did and not have a proper chem lab so that you can do the experiments in it. That is the greatest form of discrimination. What I would say, though, is that school choice compounds that. And when I look at this bill that you're proposing to provide tax credits, this is a different structure than we have in Milwaukee. But what I see here are a couple of things. First of all, I think when you've talked on and on and on about being able to align your values with it, so that if I'm a a donor, say I give to the Lutherans, I love the Lutherans because they donate and donate. So if I donate to the Lutherans, there's nothing in this bill that would prevent them from providing these scholarships to Lutherans as opposed to other children and not discriminating against them. What I found in Milwaukee, after having voted for this, is that the count day, as you talked about, is that third Friday in September. And what happens is that the choice charter schools get the kids in, and when they find that they have disabilities or behavioral problems or other things, they dismiss them after that count. The public school has to take them back, and they get to keep the money for 3 years after they kick them out. And so, yes, it does decrease the amount of money that public schools have. Public schools, there is, when we talk about it's not the public's money, well, the public there are not elected officials that are on the boards of many of these schools. And I do think that there is a great deal of accountability problems. I can see that I am running out of time in more ways than one. But I've been around a long time, and I fought against schools that have had rapists as the principal, everything. I just want to, before I close, I want to tell you how very proud we are of you, Ms. Verma. And I also want to say to you, Ms. Sedler, you get it. Yep. Parental involvement is the basic key ingredient to making sure that your kids succeed. Noticing what they're gifted at, that they're talented at, and kids can succeed in everything. And with regard to my other colleagues, I think they're gone for the quorum call, talking about they know what to do because they're grandmothers. Hey, I'm a great-grandmother. And I think that every child, no matter where they live, ought to have an opportunity. And you ought not have to siphon money away from the greatest democratizing institution in our country, and that's a public education, that you can walk down the street anywhere you live, down the dirt road, and learn algebra in the 8th grade. That's where we need to be heading. And not, these, I got 30 more seconds.
No, you're a minute over, and there's only 9 of us that aren't at the quorum, counting you and I. We're 2 of the 9.
Oh, and they need our vote, right?
Yes, so.
Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you to all my colleagues. You're listening to me.
I enjoyed every bit of it. I want to thank you all. We will recess subject to the call of the chair, and we will reconvene at the conclusion of the speaker election process.
To their lowest levels in decades as measured by data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. The drop in math test scores was the sharpest decline seen in the last 50 years. Reading scores declined the most for lowering performing students, but the scores dropped all across all percentiles. None of this should surprise us, though. Liberal elected officials across the country worked with unions to ensure that schools remained closed during the COVID-19 pandemic. American children, especially those from underprivileged communities, were left behind in order to appease the wishes of union activists. In my home state of Florida, we have seen a huge influx into the state of Florida, and I talked to a lot of those families, and those families would come up to me at events and say, the reason that we are here is because we want our children to be in an in-person classroom, and in Michigan or in New York City or all these other places where their children were not allowed to be in person, they moved their entire families to Florida just so their kids could be in an in-person classroom. President Biden and his CDC director worked hand in hand with Randy Weingard, the head of the powerful American Federation of Teachers Union, to keep schools closed for in-person learning in 2021. Thanks to their efforts, American students missed out on vital in-school experiences, and the declining test scores tell us the objective truth about the destructive effects of their policies. Facing such a systematic failure of our educational system, American parents, especially those with the financial means, sought alternative options for their children. Charter schools in New York City saw a 7.8% increase in enrollment between 2020 and 2022. Meanwhile, over 55% of private schools saw increased enrollment between 21 and 22. Congress must work to empower the American families to make the educational choices that make sense for their children. President Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act helped tremendously by expanding the use of 529 accounts for K-12 educational expenses. Looking ahead, we can pass bills like the Educational Choice for Children Act, which would create a federal scholarship tax credit to help encourage investment in scholarship programs to cover expenses related to K-12 education. These policies will help American families achieve the educational freedom they deserve and set up our children for future success. We've seen in Florida, too, my time in the state legislature, where we increased the amount and the ability for the dollars to follow the children in K-12 education. There's a classical academy of Sarasota that's in my district that has a waiting list for children because parents are yearning and striving for a classical education for our children in a place where true education occurs. Mr. DeAngelis, in your testimony, you note that Randy Weingart called President Trump's effort to reopen schools in the fall of 2020 as reckless, callous, and cruel. How did the extended school closures promoted by Mrs. Weingart affect the educational progress of our American students?
Yeah, and Mrs. Weingart pretty much gaslighted the American public before Congress when she tried to lie about their role in keeping schools closed for so long. Twitter, which is now called X, actually slapped a community note on her tweet, which is now a post, for basically lying about how they fought to keep the schools closed. They were saying that they actually fought to keep them open. But this hurt kids in so many ways, academically, physically, mentally, and there are 6 rigorous studies on the topic. I did the first one published in a journal called Social Science Quarterly, all finding that in places that had stronger teachers' unions, the public schools were less likely to remain open. So like there's so much learning loss. There's reports by Emily Oster and her colleagues in National Bureau of Economic Research finding that in places that had schools closed longer, there was more learning loss. And I think this is basically accepted as fact now that the teachers unions had a hand in it, and it led to learning loss for kids. It's time to give families true power, let them direct their kids' education. If we had national school choice all across the country when the pandemic hit, the schools wouldn't have closed as long. And in fact, a study I cited earlier by Michael Hartney and Leslie Finger found that in places that had more competition, more low-cost Catholic schools in the area, the public schools were more likely to open too.
Thank you. Mrs. Varma, am I pronouncing that correctly? As a former state legislator, I was heartened to hear your inspiring story about how the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship Program helped you and your siblings access the educational opportunities that led to such success. How will legislation like the ECCA help underprivileged youth gain access to essential educational opportunities like you did through Florida's program?
Thank you for the question. This act will help so many families because you're giving the option and the choice to the parents, and parents will know what their problems are. They'll know where they stand financially, and they'll know that we need to get this child into a certain school. I know in my story, my parents knew that the only way out of poverty was through a quality education and high quality education until they found the best schools that were aligned with their values, the best schools that were aligned with pushing us academically, and the curriculums. They love to have the direct hand in our education, and my mom knew that. I was talking about this earlier. My mom knew that making sure that she controlled our education, that she knew what was best for us, would help us in our success in the future. So.
Well, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for staying during the recess while we elected a speaker. I know there was a lot of talk about that earlier in the hearing, but thank you for your time. Thank you for being here today. I yield back.
Mr. Moore is recognized for questions.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is an important topic. I have 4 boys, 11 and under, and I absolutely love our public school system. And my wife and I are doubling our efforts to get involved and to do everything that we can to make sure that they're successful. And at the same time, Utah just passed and just went through their own process to do a school choice program. And again, I am choosing to invest and put every ounce of effort into our public schools. We love it. We love it for all the reasons that we've always loved public schools. And I love that Utah went through this process to create that type of competitive spirit that needs to exist in every industry in the world, in my opinion. As a conservative, I believe that competition is the most important thing that makes everything thrive. And Ms. Varma, I love your story that it was successful for you and for others. Governor Ducey from Arizona, it's probably one of the most inspiring individuals that I've ever listened to talk about this particular issue. It wasn't an easy thing to do, and he had to go to every angle of his school boards and his communities and sell this concept, and he's seeing good outcomes. This is the point. We have to have our states as incubators of success and try these things. It's never going to be implemented perfectly. It's not going to be implemented perfectly in Utah from the very start of this, as we've just gone through this legislative cycle last spring. But we have to enable states to find these opportunities to do good for the entirety of the community. And so I love the perspective that you all bring, and I love that my wife and I and our second grade teacher, Mrs. Hall, I have a boy with special needs, and she's overly emphasizing what she can do for him, and she is at her wit's end with my son, who is the greatest kid in the world, but needs extra special care. He has an IEP. He has help that comes in, the aides that come and support him. Our school districts are going to lengths to make it so my child can have what he needs. And so I want a competitive environment that will exist, and I love the balance that Utah's finding. And my colleagues get sick and tired of me talking about how great Utah is, and they need to settle in, because as we continue to lead the nation in all the important indicators, I will continue to talk about the importance there. And that kind of brings me to two other things. Mr. DeAngelis, as I talk about states across the country working to address these children's instructional needs, we need to be the incubators of innovation and create these ideas. Can you give us any more from your experience and your engagement on this space about making education more affordable that hasn't been discussed yet, and what, if anything, that we can do at the congressional level to support that?
Yeah, look, we spend a lot of money at the K-12 level already. We spend over $17,000 per student, according to the National Center for Education Statistics, and that number has increased about 155% after adjusting for inflation since 1970. But the money's not making its way into the classroom in so many states. Over the same period, teacher salaries have only increased by about 10%. So the money's going towards administrative bloat, staffing surges, because the government school monopoly has no incentive to spend additional dollars wisely unless you allow families to vote with their feet and have that competitive pressure to do a better job. And in fact, 5 studies have found that private and charter school choice competition also leads to higher teacher salaries in the public schools too. So this is a win-win solution. It's not us versus them. It's not private versus public versus charter. It's about education freedom and parents choosing for their own kids. And this also leads to better outcomes in the public schools. Yes, we've had a lot of success in red states. In Utah, for example, 9 other red states have gone universal in just 2 years alone, in addition to Utah. But we should supercharge those efforts, and we should expand school choice across the nation with the Educational Choice for Children Act. The new speaker, I'm proud to announce, is also a co-sponsor on the bill as well.
Thank you. Mr. Redmond, one more thing. Utah has a really unique program that they provide tuition assistance, even provide free tuition for juniors and seniors in high school to attend technical colleges. They go get a certification, they learn how to be an EMT, and then they go off into a 4-year degree in a lot of cases. It's a great program. 529 plans don't often cover technical education. Is this a limitation? Is this something that we need to be addressing so we can properly fill the jobs of tomorrow?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. Good question. Absolutely. I am very much pro young people who colleges is just not a good fit for them. So if you take a college or a kid coming out of high school, actually there are associations and programs designed to try to acclimate high school students to the trucking industry, for instance. So that way they know that there is a choice. There is something that they can strive for right now, that they don't have to spend 60, 80, 100,000, whatever college is today, or whatever college they go to, or planning or thinking about going to. There's a much more financially beneficial solution. So I wholehearily endorse and praise anyone who tries to give technical schools a try and let them know what that is truly a great option for them.
Thank you, Chairman. I remain available to all of my colleagues from other states other than Utah to continue to share my best practices on how to truly do things, and I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Evans is recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. I appreciate this opportunity to discuss how non-college pathways can help grow and develop competitive workforce. This is especially important for me as my home city of Philadelphia has been one of the largest black populations nationwide, yet large disparity exists between education and attainment of black and white residents. That is why I've been laser focused on expanding opportunity for individuals to develop additional pathways to the workforce like community and technical college. I'm a proud graduate of Community College of Philadelphia, and I know firsthand how community and technical colleges can provide an affordable option for wide income spectrum of students to access paying high demand jobs. We must continue to invest and train the next generation of workers to address our workforce shortage and ensure workers have the right to compete. I want to Dr. To question you. Can you speak to how community and technical college can help prepare young America for job creation by the Democrat infrastructure, transportation, energy investment, and recent legislation? And how can we ensure these opportunities are going to these communities that have been historically excluded from federal investment?
Thank you, Mr. Evans. So, community technical colleges do play that very unique role in our communities. One, by having access for all people from K through 12. They may not receive the great K through 12 educational experience, and there's got to be a place in the community where they're just not left off and stuck in remedial classes. I have seen a lot of growth where community technical colleges were able to do integrated learning strategies. They could take, go into machinists, you got to do measurements of 2000s, but if they've never got the concepts of fractions and just decimals and using precision measurements tools, they can't be a machinist. And I've seen how community college is able to bridge that gap while they're in their machinist program by integrating those strategies. If a person is English as a second language, ESL training, coming into our communities and looking for growth opportunities for employment, they get ESL training at the community technical college. But more specifically, community college help open doors for diverse communities, for people who don't have a aunt or uncle or brother working at the manufacturing plant or working at an electrical company. Like I mentioned before, our manufacturing sector and our electrical sector, right, it is what it is. 70% white male. And we need more white men in the electrical field, and we need more black and brown people in electrical fields. But if there's not a way for them to get their basic training and to be employable day one to go work for that electrical company, we're leaving out a significant part of our community. And the community technical college plays a very significant role to work closely with business and industry to know what those expectations are on the job day one, have the training tied to their expectation and curriculum. Just because they're doing industry-based training is one thing, but it's got to be tied to their curriculum. And they open doors, and businesses are successful, and all of our communities are being successful at the same time, especially in your great city of Philadelphia.
I'm concerned that our education and tax training incentives aren't well structured to help people who need them. Lots of low-income students have to work, go to class, family responsibility, which may be why their classes are part-time. What advice would you give about redesigning financial assistance for students whose path isn't a full-time bachelor's degree in 4 years?
Okay. Yeah, our Jobs Act that we have out there is basic Pell, is short-term Pell. Right now, Pell doesn't cover industry-based certifications that's less than, that are non-credit setting. And a lot of the job opportunities where somebody is working, people are working 2 or 3 jobs during the day, they don't have time to take a 2-year degree to stop what they're doing. They have other obligations at home they have to meet, but they need to be able to transition into the new growth opportunities. Updating our Pell through Jobs Act, making that more flexible for short-term industry-based certification. Not to say with 6 months worth of training or 200 hours or less will make you a top-notch welder or a pipe fitter, but it'll help open your door to start your employment. And then once you start working for the employer, you'll get that additional training to be a top-notch welder or a journeyman level craftsman or craftsperson, actually. And those are certain things you do. And then also certain things we can do is make Pell tax-free on the less than benefits taxes. Make sure that those benefits are not being taxed, and make sure all that money is tax-free for our learners.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Feenstra is recognized for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank all our witnesses. I greatly appreciate you taking the time. This is such an important topic, and I'm from Iowa, and we've done a lot of different things when it comes to the tax code and how the tax code can play such an important role in giving kids access to the school of their choice, their parents, the choice that the parent can decide where they want to go. Being chair of Ways and Means in the Iowa Senate, I created a tax credit that encouraged scholarships for organizations that help lower income students. I want to see this continue to be built on at the federal level. That being said, Dr. Dean Jalaris, I just want to ask you, if the federal government can do certain things, certain tax credits, how does this play out at state levels? Because to me, when I was the chair of our Ways and Means in the state of Iowa, it always helped when I saw a backstop or a federal government grant or credit, whatever it might be, to say, hey, I can couple with that. Do you see that as we move forward with other states?
Yeah, we have a ton of states. 21 states in the U.S. already have some form of tax credit scholarships programs working out. So Florida being one of them, Iowa being another. So this isn't some idea that hasn't been tried before, and it's worked out successfully. In Florida, I believe they have about 400,000 scholarships that have been given out this year alone. So it's people want it. And look, it's all private dollars. I know there might be concerns about the federal government being involved, but these are still private dollars that are donated from individuals. It's not government money, it's individuals' money. And what I like to point out also in this particular bill, the Educational Choice for Children Act, is that there are explicit anti-government regulation provisions in the bill as well to allow for maximum freedom on the part of the providers. The scholarship granting organizations and the private schools do not become government entities just because they're involved with school choice. So I think this is a great move forward for freedom. Every Republican in particular should be on board, but it doesn't need to be a partisan issue either. Look, you look at the voting records, you look at Real Clear Opinion Research, supermajority support among Republicans, Democrats, and independents from this year. And in Florida, in their House, when they went all in on school choice this past year, they had 4 Democrats vote in favor of it in the House. So I hope we could reach across the aisle and also allow for everybody to be involved and to support parental rights in education.
Yeah, thanks for those comments, Doctor. I agree. It should be non-political. It should be based on what the parent wants, what they want best for their child, and they should dictate and decide where it's best that their child earns their education. Mr. Redmond, you've also done extraordinary work to help people earn the skill of truck driving. In the truck driving industry, do you see a substantial number of employers paying to send their kids to driving school? And if so or if not, what can we do to help that?
Well, that's a mixed bag there. Some employers try to assist by way of tuition reimbursement, and that's a great program. But unfortunately, the person has to come up with the money first, and then after they graduated and they go to work for that particular company, little by little, maybe $150 to $200 a month, it goes back toward their tuition as, like I said, in a form of reimbursement. But again, that doesn't solve the problem of someone getting into our program. So we do need more programs. As I mentioned in my earlier statement, that's one of the things that kind of touches my heart is looking a person dead in the eye and saying, because you just don't have the money right now, I can't help you. And we need to do more to help folks get into school.
Yep. So do businesses help at all? I mean, do they do that or not?
No, not really. I mean, unless they're working for them.
Gotcha.
Like, say, for instance, you get the point. Whereas a company, XYZ company, may say, I want to send one of my employees to your school.
Right. So how about, have people already been in the workforce? I think of truck drivers specifically, that you really have to be 21 years of age before you can drive a truck. So from 18 to 21, they already get in the workforce. Do you see that as a problem? All of a sudden, it's like, okay, I've been in the workforce now, I've got to spend a lot of dollars to try to drive truck. It's prohibitive for me to do that?
Well, no, well, actually, if I may, it's 21 to drive interstate. It's 18 to 20 to be able to drive intrastate.
In some states,
So yeah, well, in all states. So if you're 18, you technically can drive a semi-truck.
Okay. Very good. How about Mr. Redmond? There's other things that go on when you want a skills or a trade. For instance, buying tools and things like that. Do you see that as a barrier sometimes for kids being engaged in different skills? And could there be tax credits to allow that to help alleviate some of those costs?
Sure. I mean, anything that can help alleviate costs would be great for anyone in the trucking industry. So.
Yep. Ms. Varma, have you seen a growth in state offering, different incentives? So I noted this earlier, but do you see that if we can do something at the federal level, that this will expand other states going down this path?
Thank you for the question. Yes, this would also push the states to also pass their own scholarship programs. But until then, we can't allow these kids to just fail and to not have access to any quality education. Passing this would allow families to start using that scholarship program until states catch up.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The great Miss Van Dyne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by responding to my colleague, and I really wish he was here, but my colleague from Texas, his misguided remarks earlier. He seems to have issue with what he describes as a federal companion to what's occurring in Texas. And I think it's disingenuous, to say the least, that our governor is somehow holding teachers hostage. I think that the teachers have been holding our children and parents hostage, but to ensure that Texas families have access to their own taxpayer dollars to send their kids to schools that they want to. This is not government money. The government actually takes individuals' money, and then they think that they get to decide how it's best spent on children's educations, which is not the case. And bureaucrats should not be deciding children's education. Parents should be, and vouchers allow them the opportunity to do so. The U.S. educational system failed the next generation, as you have so eloquently mentioned, by shuttering classrooms, by masking students, and forcing inappropriate and extreme material in the classroom. What we have seen is systemic failures, specifically in urban schools. Children's future success should not be limited to the zip code in which they were born. And we're seeing that overwhelmingly. And I would just love to ask my Texas colleague why he has a problem with students who are born into poor urban schools that are completely failing them. Why he has a problem allowing them an opportunity to go somewhere else where they can be successful. And you did not have an opportunity to respond to his criticism and to his comments, Mr. DeAngelis. And I would love to know, do you have a response for that?
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. Look, those standing in the schoolhouse door fighting against educational opportunities, those are the people holding children's education hostage. And in Texas, look, they spend over $15,700 per student in the government-run schools per year. Private school tuition in the state's only about $10,600 per student per year, a lot less than what they're spending in the traditional school system. That number has increased by about 166% after adjusting for inflation since 1970 in Texas. And Glenn Rogers, a so-called Republican in the House in Texas, was quoted earlier, so I have to point out that he was endorsed by the Texas affiliate of Randy Weingarten's union, the Texas Federation of Teachers, so he might not be the conservative that he was championed to be. And look, 88% of Texas Republican primary voters support school choice. This is a political winner, but it's also just the right thing to do. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. And look, in Texas, it passed easily through the Senate, 18-13, but 12 of the Democrats voted against it. And a quick search revealed that 8 out of the 12 at least either went to private school themselves or sent their own kids to private school. I don't blame them for that, but they shouldn't stand in the schoolhouse door pull up the ladder from behind themselves, and then tell less advantaged families that they can't have access to a better education. I believe the words were said earlier that we should just fix the public schools. Well, one, school choice does fix the public schools from the bottom up, allowing for bottom-up accountability. Look, underperforming private schools, they shut down. Underperforming government schools, they often get more money. But allowing families to vote with their feet translates that competition into the public sector too. Low-income families do not want to wait anymore. They don't have time to wait anymore. Their kids don't have time to wait anymore. Advantaged politicians who take advantage of private schooling for themselves, they didn't have to wait. Families shouldn't have to wait either. So let's expand school choice to families in Texas, but let's do it nationwide too. The Educational Choice for Children Act is the vehicle to do so. Let's not have families wait any longer.
You mentioned that in private schools, it's about $10,000 and that the government's spending $15,000 and it's only increased. Where do you see those dollars going?
It's going towards administrative bloat and staffing surges. That means more dues-paying members for the unions. So Randy Weingarten, who makes over $500,000 a year, really likes that increase in spending going to more staffing, but it doesn't go towards teacher salaries. It doesn't go towards the families for education freedom. And look, yeah, teacher salaries in Texas have been stagnant since 1970, have only increased by about 10% after adjusting for inflation. The money doesn't make its way into the classroom. Competition will funnel more of those dollars towards the most important educational resource in the classroom, which happens to be the teacher. So school choice can benefit teachers too, not just families and parents. It's a win-win solution. And since 2000, the number of students enrolled nationwide in public schools has increased by about 7%. The number of teachers has increased by about 8%. The number of principals and assistant principals has ballooned by about 33%. The number of administrators since then has increased by about 90%.
So every single time we get these associations in our office, they always ask for more money, more money, more money. You've shown that they've gotten more money. Have you seen better results come out for our schools?
No, the outcomes have been flat on the long-term trends on the NAEP, and funding doesn't make its way into the classroom. We've increased the spending by so much, and it's the definition of insanity, trying to do the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We've spent more, and if we're going to spend any more than we already do, which is about over $17,000 per student nationwide, it should go to people, not buildings. If the public schools are the best option, if you're going to increase funding, let's give more funding to families, not to the institutions, just like we do with higher ed with Pell Grants. Give the money to the students, let them choose, just like we do with pre-K, like Head Start. The funding follows the decision of the family. Let's do that for K through 12.
And I couldn't agree more.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Football and led on the issue. They've become the parents' party in a sense. But that doesn't mean Democrats don't have the opportunity to do so too. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. We should have bipartisan support for education freedom. And it's true, a lot of Democrats send their own kids to private school. In Florida, 4 of them voted for it in the House of Representatives in Florida for universal school choice, the full-fledged program. So it doesn't need to be a partisan issue. It just has been in the short term. Hopefully in the medium to longer term, or maybe we can have the members of the committee on the Democrat side sign on to the Educational Choice for Children Act. I think that would be fantastic. We had a great speech from Ms. Moore earlier saying that she voted for school choice when she was in Milwaukee, in Wisconsin, several decades ago. I thought she was going to next say that she was about to sign on to the bill as well. I think that would be fantastic.
My point is, since 29% of the American people say they're Democrats and 27% say they're Republicans, that suggests there's a lot of people outside of the two political party structures. So to label this as only a so-called Republican criticism, I don't think that helps any party here.
Yeah, I welcome the Democrats to reach across the aisle, to co-sponsor the bill, and to support school choice for other families, like many of them have supported for their own families. It shouldn't just be school choice for me, not for thee. It should be for all families in America, regardless of your background, zip code, or income. And I hope we really can listen to the voters. I mean, supermajority support, according to Real Clear Opinion, for school choice among Republicans, Democrats, and Independents. So I think, Ranking Member Neal, we can agree that this should not be a partisan issue, and we can move the ball down the field together.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Byers recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and Ranking Member O'Neill. Having had 12 years of Catholic education, I'm sort of going to stay away from that half of the conversation. I did get a beautiful education. I do worry, though, not for your response, about what happens when the most talented and aggressive and high initiative kids in public schools leave behind the kids who don't have the parents that are paying attention or don't have the initiative or the background. And I'd love to see any data that shows that school choice raises the salaries of the teachers left behind. That'd be a wonderful thing, because you're greatly concerned that all those increases in school funding that none of it went to the teachers. And I come from Virginia, where our teachers are still not paid at the national average. But Dr. Melancon, I was thrilled that you mentioned the Hampton Road Regional Workforce Training System here in Virginia as an example of a successful partnership between industry and local government and educational institutions. And I know that's been a really important factor in maintaining the industrial base there, and specifically the defense industrial base with Newport News Shipbuilding. Is there anything we can do in the federal government to incentivize the creation of programs like this around the country?
Yes, thank you. And yes, the Hampton Roads project is great. I think it trained over 900 individuals, diverse individuals, into that sector. I think it's over 90% job placement for those individuals. Majority of those individuals were TANF and food stamp recipients. But it opened the door of people who had been left out of the manufacturing sector to get a high growth, high demand skill to work in the Marine and also military aspects of manufacturing. I think that model has been replicated when we talked about the Trade Adjustment Act, the TAC program for community technical colleges. That was a sector strategy. Similar, we also talked about the North Baton Rouge Industrial Training Initiative, working with ExxonMobil. And it's just kind of bringing in a diverse group of people, working with contractors who typically did not recruit from those individuals, but once they did and built a relationship with them, the whole area has succeeded and provided pathways from individuals who coming from, just like the Hampton Roads, who are disconnected from high growth demand. There might have been a manager at Circle K, got a skill training, and now they're a machinist, a foreman, a supervisor on the manufacturing floor, and that opportunity wouldn't have been open. So the investment in Jobs Act, the modernization of WIOA, but further build out and reinvestment, I think, in TAC 2.0, it will provide that infrastructure of that type of sector strategy where community partners are at the table, businesses are at the middle, community technical colleges there providing training and other community supports, and also other supportive services is also needed. Childcare, but particularly in that type of setting, we need childcare for shift workers and so forth. So the opportunity is there, the demand is there. It's just kind of rebuilding the infrastructure.
Along that line, 2 years ago, we passed a huge apprenticeship bill, bipartisan, and then in the Inflation Reduction Act, there's all kinds of additional incentives for registered apprentices. But you keep hearing from industry that they can't find the people to apply for the apprenticeships in the first place. Well, what can we do to make them more attractive and to get more people actually engaged in this? And think Switzerland or Germany.
Yes. So I think the key thing on the apprenticeship is just making people aware of those pathways. I think a lot of it through service is once somebody goes to the shop floor, once somebody's familiar what a welder does every day, if you don't come from a family of welders, you may not know about the likelihood of being a welder. So I think it's just exposing not only our parents, but also the kids and also the schools about these pathways and get them touching the equipment and showing about that. And then also showing about working in the apprenticeship program, because it's agreed upon, you pretty much, the more you learn and more skill that you can be proficient as, the more you're gonna earn. And I think it's just still, apprenticeship has been around for a very long time. There's just not a common pathway for people's careers. A lot of people think about going for a 4-year degree and they'll be well off, but there's a whole lot of different opportunities for success.
Yeah. I know this hearing's been mostly about how tax policy can affect educational freedom, educational choice. One of the things I really worry about in Virginia particularly is what are we doing with the energy workers that are being displaced. You know, we had lots of coal miners in Southwest Virginia 40 years ago, but with the advent of longwall mining, you needed many fewer miners, and then natural gas came along. So you've got a huge congressional district with a lot of unemployed coal miners, and trying to find ways to train them to put them back to work has proven very difficult. And with that, I guess I need to yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Carey is recognized for questions.
I want to thank the chairman and thank the ranking member for having this very important hearing, but more importantly, I want to thank you guys. We obviously had a busy day today, and I'm glad that you were able to stay around and let us ask you a few questions. Hopefully you got some lunch in between time? Okay. I'm fortunate that my home state of Ohio is a proponent for school choice. It already directs more than $100 million to private schools through the expansion of our voucher. In the city of Columbus, and I split that with my colleague Joyce Beatty, at least 25% of the city's public school students are now attending charter schools. Recent legislative changes expanded our scholarship programs, which means every Ohio family, regardless of income or school district, is now eligible for aid to go to a private institution. Ohio families can earn up to 450% of the federal poverty level, that's $135,000 per family of four, can receive the full amount of a scholarship offered in year 23-24. That's $8,407 for high school students, that is $6,165 for K-8 students. I'm also a proud co-sponsor with my colleague Adrian Smith's legislation, the Educational Choice for Children's Act. Additionally, I'm co-sponsor of the Freedom to Invest in Tomorrow's Workforce Act. Central Ohio is booming. We really are. Between Intel coming in on one side of us, we've got Honda building a new battery facility, Honda LG building a new battery facility. We're going to need to be able to fill those positions, and we're going to need to be able to fill it with people that are well trained. I want to ask Mr. Redmond, I want to give you as much time as you possibly can. I've been hearing from a bunch of the organizations, as I mentioned, I've been really active in this space, that are part of this Tomorrow's Workforce Coalition, which supports the Freedom to Invest in Tomorrow's Workforce Ask. And if I have it right, I believe that the Commercial Vehicle Trading Association is a member of that coalition. Could you just talk further about how critical this proposal is and why your group supports it and who is most likely to benefit from this?
Thank you, Congressman. We absolutely support this action. And in the trucking world, as you may already know, that there's a great shortage of drivers, huge shortage of drivers. So we need to do whatever we can to try to help bridge that gap. I've said once or twice, just more or less just in talk and passing, that I could put we only have one school in Oklahoma City. I could put an American truck training in every state in the country and still not make a dent in the shortage, So we need to do whatever we have to, which includes obviously the 529 plan, to give folks an opportunity to use those funds or any other funds that they can in order to go to a program like mine and other trucking schools. The inflation and all the other things that's happened to our country that's just made it harder for folks. Some folks are jumping out of other careers to go into trucking because there's more income. There's a couple of reasons why folks would go out of trucking, out of their current career into trucking, because A, more income, Then there's those folks who are just, and even those folks who wanted more income, they just can't stop and go to a 4-year college and get a degree. They can't stop their life for 4 years. So trucking is 4 to 6 weeks, $5,000, and they come out making very good income, like $60,000 to $100,000, like I mentioned before, in their first year. So, and then there's those folks who are, it's not just so much as a move from another job. It could be they just want a better life, They're in poverty. They're trying to figure out what they're going to do with their life. And then all of a sudden, the opportunity for trucking comes along, and they find out, hey, I have this money, maybe from a 529 or something else, if it were already in place, to be able to spend for school. But it's not like it's $40,000 for like a college education. It's $5,000-ish, give or take. And so from that standpoint, I think just anything we can do to support something like that is just going to help bridge the gap for truck drivers to get out, be trained properly and help our country succeed.
And I will tell you, Mr. Redmond, you were great on the time because we are just about out of time with my line of questioning. So, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Arrington is recognized for questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for indulging me here as I walk in the 11th hour. And I would like the record to reflect whatever Ranking Member Richie Neal was saying off camera and with the microphone off. This is serious business up here. I'm just curious, and I don't want to take much more of your time, and I apologize for coming in late. The 529 expansion in 17 to the K through 12, and maybe Ms. Settler, your experience there in Pennsylvania, but anybody can answer this. I just would like to know, we don't do enough oversight in Congress in general to determine whether some program or some policy provision that we've changed has had its desired impact. And so my question is, what has been the ROI on that expansion to K through 12? And can you articulate that outcome for me?
Sure. I do know that I just looked at results recently, and I forget what the publication was, where it demonstrated that private schools do score 12, 15, even as high as 20 points higher than the public district schools have traditionally. So I would offer that is proof that the programs are working. And in terms of oversight, transparency, I think parents, are quite attentive to how their children are being treated and the services being provided to them. So I think primarily that proof can be established by their satisfaction with their choice. But I don't want anyone to think the perfect has to be the enemy of the good. There are things that we can do to improve our children's situations educationally, and I think it's just a matter of having those guidelines in place, making sure they're enforced at the district and private levels. It's not just a private school issue or a charter school issue. It's also a district public school issue in terms of oversight and transparency as well. So I would ask that we look at all options and all educational models for the benefit of the children.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I would just like to say, I think the satisfaction point is really important. We're usually always so focused on standardized testing. There are 31 of 33 studies on the topic finding that school choice initiatives, at least at the K-12 level, have led to higher satisfaction among parents. 8 of those studies use random assignment methodology, gold standard, finding that winning a lottery to attend a private school using a school choice mechanism leads to higher satisfaction. In DC, for example, the voucher program here has been around for quite some time now. They found that winning a lottery to attend a private school at a third of the cost of what they're spending in the public schools in DC increased satisfaction substantially and also increased reports of safety for students as well. So parents are choosing schools for a lot of different reasons. Some of it's standardized testing and academics, but it's also values, being in a safe environment, and being in a place where the kid's actually interested. Maybe it's the specialized mission of the school that's important. So school quality is multidimensional. I think that's why satisfaction is probably the best metric of success that we have.
Well, because I came here late and just to salvage any goodwill I have left with the remaining members, I'm going to do something. We're going to make history together. I'm going to give up the balance of my time. Look at it ticking away. It's really hard for me to do, but I yield the balance of my time back to the chairman. Thank you for your indulgence, and you too, Mr. Ranking Member.
This is a day of history, for sure.
1 minute.
So, thank you, Mr. Arrington. I want to thank each and every one of the witnesses for your testimony today. Definitely very helpful. Please be advised that members have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be part of the formal hearing record. With that, the committee stands adjourned.